BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Thursday, another Dahlia Thursday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Thursdays, I talk to you guys about the story of the Black Dahlia, the murder of Elizabeth Short from 1947. And in this episode, I will be looking at Red Manley as a Black Dahlia suspect, responding to the book Cold Cases by Chana Roth, as well as the video series from Larry Harnish here on YouTube. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Black Dahlia murder. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. On January 15th of 1947, in the morning hours, Elizabeth Short's body was found in Southern California. She had been cut in half, and her body had been laid approximately 10 to 15 inches apart. Her body was also covered in lacerations, as well as mutilations, particularly to her breast area, and she was given the famous Glasgow grin, also known as the Glasgow smile. And who was responsible for this murder? Well, it's still part of the mystery. And in this episode, I want to talk about one of the most famous suspects that you will encounter in the Black Dahlia case very early on. But there are a couple conditions with Red Manley as a Black Dahlia murder suspect, because some people believe that he might be completely eliminated, that he should have been completely eliminated. To provide the most basic introduction, Red Manley was born Robert Manley, and he was a key figure in the Black Dahlia case in the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short. Manley was the last person to see Short alive, having dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel down in Los Angeles on January 9th of 1947. While he was initially a suspect, he passed a polygraph and was cleared by the police. And as far as being the last person to see her alive, absolutely you would have to look into this person, even if other people had seen her alive, even if he spent an hour with her on January 9th of 1947. Yes, they should have looked into him. And Red Manley was also 25 years old at the time, and I don't think 25 is impossible for a Black Dahlia suspect. I know that there are going to be psychological profiles out there that are going to state that maybe the Black Dahlia Avenger was somebody who was older than 30, but I really don't have that type of narrow-minded thinking where it has to be 30 to 39 or 20 to 29. I even think that, from age 20 and upward is reasonable for the Black Dahlia Avenger. More detailed information about Red Manley. The last to see her. Manley was a traveling salesman, and he had been with Short in San Diego, and then he drove her to Los Angeles. Well, a traveling salesman, would he necessarily be able to perform a surgical murder? The Biltmore Hotel was where he claimed that he dropped her off because he said she was meeting her sister. Due to the circumstances and the fact that he had been recently with her, Manley was considered a suspect and underwent police questioning and a polygraph. The polygraph test results, along with other factors, led to Manley's alibi being accepted, and he was cleared of suspicion. And as I said, I've been reading the book Cold Cases by Chana Roth, and it states that there's actually a lot more to it than the polygraph. If anything, the polygraph is somewhat of an afterthought. One of the main reasons why he was cleared was not only the alibi. The alibi is a very, very important reason why he would have been cleared of suspicion, but also because they examined his car and there was no blood evidence in the car, and they believe that when Elizabeth Short's body was brought to the dump site, that she was transported in a vehicle, of course, but they believe the perpetrator was most likely using the vehicle that he would have had access to. Unless Red Manley had some other car, which they weren't able to pinpoint, then he was most likely not using his own car. No blood evidence found in the car. No evidence other than what was belonging to him was in the car. There were no signs of evidence in the car that connected him to the murder. There, I said it, laid it out. But there is a book out there that has been put online, and it's called The Black Dahlia in Hollywood. And this reminds me of the older days when people would write ebooks, but they would put it out on a blog or a website, and each entry in the blog or the web journal would count as a chapter. And this book is available online for free, and there's a chapter on Robert Red Manley. Robert Red Manley was a tall, good-looking 25-year-old traveling salesman from Southgate, with a beautiful wife and a young son at home. When he registered for the draft in 1942, he was 5 feet 10.5 inches tall, and he weighed 140 pounds. He had red hair and a light complexion, and a scar on his left elbow. At the time, he was working for the Montgomery Ward Company. 7 months after discharge, Bob Manley married Harriet Cooper on November 28th of 1945. 3 years younger than her husband, she gave birth to their son Stephen on September 8th of 1946. By 1947, Red was employed as a sales engineer by Baker and Company in Huntington Park. According to investigators, his territory stretched from the Bay Area to San Diego. He took orders for plumbing supplies and traversed his route in his black 1939 Studebaker coupe. All right, so what necessarily does that have to do with the Black Dahlia murder? What are the signs from this person's occupation that would indicate that he committed the Black Dahlia murder? Where did this take place? At home with his wife and son? At work when he is just a traveling salesman in the back office of with company supplies or something like that? I think that the Black Dahlia Avenger would be much more likely to be somebody who was a medical doctor, butcher, slaughterman, undertaker, and this is one that we brought up from mostly our discussions in the comments section about maybe somebody who was connected to the funeral industry, and even using a hearse would be a very suitable vehicle for transporting Elizabeth Short's body. But also, I must say though, this concept of leaving blood evidence behind in a vehicle is actually somewhat challenging because they believe that the blood was drained from Elizabeth Short's body. Maybe not completely. Of course not completely, but there shouldn't have been an enormous amount of evidence that would have been left behind, especially if she had been transported in bags, and they found 2 cement bags near the dump site. And I'll talk about that more when I discuss Larry Harnish and his videos. But to just provide a little bit of more information about Elizabeth Short, and this is Red Manley's account. In San Diego, visiting his accounts, he recalled, "I saw Miss Short standing on a corner across from the Western Airlines, and I looked at her, and I decided to try and pick her up. I asked if she wanted a ride, and she turned her head, and she wouldn't look at me. And I talked some more. I told her who I was, and what I did, and so forth. And finally she turned around and asked me, and if I didn't think it was wrong to ask a girl on the corner to get in my car. I said yes, but I'd like to take you home, and she got in my car." Well, if anything, I think Red Manley was being somewhat honest with his intentions right there. But I must say, he seems like a rather weak Black Dahlia suspect, but he definitely should have been looked into. Otherwise, this would be just a giant question mark. And I also must say that I think that the polygraph evidence would be horribly overrated for the following reason. Polygraphs might not be as horrible as people make them out to be, but in 1947, I wouldn't trust a polygraph at all. In the 1990s, there were some new developments, such as the computerized polygraph, which can analyze different parts of the body. But even up until the 1980s, it's my understanding that polygraphs mostly functioned off of a 3-part combination of heart rate, blood pressure, and galvanic skin tension. And in short, if someone were able to just stay extremely calm and not have their heart rate go up and their blood pressure go up, then it wouldn't necessarily be detectable, and that is one of the ways that psychopaths were able to pass the polygraph tests. And again, in the 1990s, a lot of things were changed. The computerized polygraph uses something that's called the zone algorithm scoring method. It measures physiological tracings in the body, and the short story is that when you're thinking with your imagination versus thinking with your memory, you're going to be triggering different physiological reactions within your body, and these can be documented. Now, is all of that stuff pseudoscience? It still is. It's still not a perfect science. But if that's the case, did investigators know that in 1947? Most likely, for the following reason. When somebody is taking a polygraph, it isn't necessarily about whether or not it's going to give an accurate result. I can tell you countless times when people have passed polygraphs and they were actually lying, or they failed polygraphs when they were telling the truth. So how could all of this match up? Like, what's the whole point? They use polygraphs as a practice in interrogation. It's a point of leverage. If they think that this person is going to be guilty, then they can use it to put the pressure on them. And then they can start saying something to the effect of, hey, you failed the polygraph. All right, you know you did it. We know you did it. It's time for you to confess. It's used to put pressure on the suspect. And that's the real function of polygraphs. It's more about the interrogation and getting the suspect to admit to something, to confess to something, and also to reveal additional information. Now, that's just my take on the subject, and I know that that's going to generate some controversial opinions, but I would love to see what you guys are saying in the comments section down below. But I do believe that the members of law enforcement in 1947 would be aware of everything that I just said. But I would like to switch to Chayna Ross' book now, Cold Cases, which is more or less a true crime anthology where she talks about many different stories. And I've discussed the concepts and the ideas that she has shared about the JonBenet Ramsey murder. I talk about JonBenet on Tuesdays, and about D.B. Cooper. I talk about D.B. Cooper on Fridays. With the Black Dahlia case, I will share my opinions in just a second, but one that follow-up is, she tells the story of Red Manley in her own book, and she did share something that also used certain pseudoscience tactics in relation to interrogating Red Manley, and one of them was looking at his facial expressions and body language, and the detectives are eyeing him over, and they're saying, we can't get a read on this guy, his facial expressions could indicate anything. He seems a little bit baby-faced. He seems a little bit sad. What could that indicate? And I know some people go off of gut instincts. And I know that this is in a completely different realm than the world of polygraphs, but some people would just think that they can correctly predict someone's innocence or guilt based on their facial expressions, their body language, their posture, the way they're sitting, the way they're crossing their arms. I even put lie detectors above body language and facial expressions because I've really found that it's just so unpredictable. You don't know what someone is thinking just because of their body language and their facial expressions. Have you ever heard that expression, the eyes are the window to the soul? Well, one hypothesis out there is that when people make prolonged eye contact, they often show signs of discomfort because they think they're being confronted, or they're going to be singled out, or they think that they're in trouble for some reason, so they show signs of discomfort and nervousness and just downright unpleasant behavior. So then people interpret those signs of discomfort, unpleasantness, and just downright uncomfortable behavior as signs of guilt. So you looked into my eyes and I could see that you were lying? No. You saw that you were making somebody uncomfortable and you interpreted that as a sign of deception. So I don't like it at all when people are using body language and facial expressions in terms of interrogating tactics. It's not something that I support, and I don't think highly of it. What I think is much more important is even beyond the polygraph. Red Manley had an alibi. He doesn't seem like to be someone who would have surgical knowledge to the degree of what happened with Elizabeth Short, because it seems like somebody really knew a lot about medical science. They knew how to handle the tools and equipment. And when I say medical science, it could also be animal science. I do not exclude anybody like a butcher or working for a slaughterhouse. But also, Red Manley seems like a really lousy suspect. If anything, maybe he just spent time with Elizabeth Short and he happened to spend time with someone who ultimately was murdered. Now, the book Cold Cases does expand, and I found her sections on D.B. Cooper and JonBenet Ramsey to be much better. They were very analytical, and she's genuinely sharing what she thinks about these true crime cases. In regards to the sections on Elizabeth Short and the Black Dahlia murder, I found that it started out by talking about the facts of the case, and then it quickly turned into a feminist diatribe, and I was really quite surprised because she chose to use Elizabeth Short for the cover of her book Cold Cases. And when I say diatribe, it starts out by saying that a lot of people are going to be looking at the mugshot of Elizabeth Short, and then they're going to use it as a blank canvas to just project their own ideas onto her. Elizabeth Short's picture is almost used as a Rorschach test among true crime sleuths and enthusiasts. And I just began to think, I'm not completely convinced that that's true. I do think that there are people out there who are using this story as some type of fuel for their own wild and wacky conspiracy theory, or even if they're going to use it as some type of giant interconnected interplay with countless other crimes that have been connected to the Black Dahlia case. And yes, I am thinking of Steve Hodel and accusing his father of dozens and dozens of murders, but also Fred Morse and the Anglin brothers get accused by David Gold of being the Black Dahlia Avenger, as well as every crime under the sun or in the darkness in the 20th century. And then Ed Edwards also gets accused of being the Black Dahlia Avenger and committing countless other crimes, the Zodiac murders, amongst others. But ultimately, 660 murders get attributed to Ed Edwards, including the Black Dahlia case? Yes, people do exploit this story. I am fully aware of that. But I would challenge this notion that Elizabeth Short's picture, specifically her mugshot, has been turned into some type of Rorschach test, because the average person does not believe any of the stories that I've just shared. The average person does not believe any of these wild and wacky conspiracy theories. How do I know this? Because I read what you guys are saying in the comments section here on Black Box Online Radio. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe and drop a comment down below if you want to participate in the discussions. You're all wonderful people, and you guys don't support those theories. You guys don't talk about some type of giant interconnected set of homicides committed by a single super serial killer. Very few people actually think that that's what happened. And if anything, people will kind of look at Steve Hodel's material because it's very popular. People will look at the Ed Edwards theory or David Gold's theory because, at the very least, they're curious. They want to know about all the books that are out there. Oh, well, this is something that I haven't found before. Let's see what this book is about. And then they put it down and they don't ever look at it again or take it seriously ever again. And that's the long and short of it. So I definitely think, though, that there is this desire for people to use the Black Dahlia story because of its fame for some type of popularity or just to get more exposure onto their own stories for some reason. And that's bad, though. If anybody actually does it, that's bad, because in true crime it should be about the truth. So I would agree with Shana Roth for about maybe 10% and then 90% disagree. Another point that she mentioned in her book was that Elizabeth Short has mostly been forgotten, and the name the Black Dahlia is one that really just sticks around more, and that's what people remember. And I also disagree with this point too. Elizabeth Short is somebody whom most true crime followers are aware of. Most true crime followers know her name, and they don't only think of her as the Black Dahlia. But once again, I do have to give credit to her when only if she means that the average English-speaking person might be familiar with the name the Black Dahlia or the Black Dahlia murder, but they might not know Elizabeth Short's name. But I still absolutely do not believe that Elizabeth Short has been forgotten, and definitely not by true crime followers. Even a casual true crime viewer would probably know Elizabeth Short's name. Although, what I have noticed is, people often confuse her with Elizabeth Smart, purely because of a slip of the tongue. I've even actually accidentally done that here on Black Box Online Radio. When I was talking about the Black Dahlia case, and I referred to her as Elizabeth Smart, and I apologize. I just had that facepalm moment where I'm like, I can't believe I said that. I know who Elizabeth Smart is. I've done episodes about her. She was the woman, the young lady, she was a girl at the time, who was abducted by Brian Mitchell, and she was held captive, and it was a very, very big missing persons case years and years ago. Now she's a woman. Of course, this happened when Elizabeth Smart was a girl. But a lot of people, even on like famous podcasts, they will have these types of slip-ups where they refer to Elizabeth Short as Elizabeth Smart and vice versa. But that's just done on accident. It's not like people are genuinely just obsessed with the image of the Black Dahlia, so they're just thinking about something else. No, people really do talk about Elizabeth Short a lot. And another point is just that there is a lot of victim shaming and victim blaming. This is all in Shana Roth's book, Cold Cases. And at this point, I do agree. She cites numerous examples in her book about how, oh, it's the victim's fault. Well, she must have been promiscuous. She must have been setting herself up for failure. She put herself in a dangerous position. I agree with all of that. And as you see, I don't think that someone's wrong about everything. There should be absolutely no victim blaming or victim shaming in this case. But there is. I've read the stuff, and I'm sure you have too. Someone did not deserve to be murdered like that. No matter what lifestyle they were living, they did not deserve to be murdered. They did not deserve to have their body mutilated, and definitely not exposed. And this is something that I think really relates to how people perceive this case, because I was talking about this last week on Dahlia Thursday when I said that everything about the Black Dahlia murder seems extremely personal, and that somebody really wanted revenge on Elizabeth Short. But at the same time, I don't blame her for anything. I don't know what she could have done that triggered the person, but she did not deserve to be murdered. And I told you that I wanted to continue with discussing the Larry Harnish videos. One more time, I have to give a shout out to Lehman, who sent me Larry Harnish's channel. And I know, I said this last week, but at the beginning of every one of his videos, he says that he's been researching the Black Dahlia case since 1996. I've been doing it for 4 weeks. Welcome to episode 4 of the Black Dahlia Avenger series here on Black Box Online Radio. This is number 4 for Dahlia Thursday. So as you see, I'm a newcomer, and I do read different types of sources, and this is one of the reasons why I'm talking about Red Manley so early on in the series. I don't think he did it. I mean, they shouldn't look at polygraphs and lie detectors and facial expressions and think that those are the reasons to exonerate him. Alibis and blood evidence would be way more valuable. And I really found that Larry Harnish's material is quite different than that of Chayna Roth, where he is getting away from just, these portrayals of somebody in the media, and he was talking much more about the hard evidence. He does monthly Q&A sessions, and I went through one of those, and I also tried watching one of his react videos to Steve Hodel. Steve Hodel, of course, wrote the Black Dahlia Avenger series, and his suspect is named George Hodel, his father. And what I found from Larry Harnish's videos was that, firstly, he told the story of the cement bags that were found. And then when Elizabeth Short's body was found, there were 2 cement bags, or concrete bags, that were found in the nearby vicinity. And they did have what he described as a drop of bloody water in it, but they still think that that was what was used to transport her body. And, very simply, the blood was drained out of Elizabeth Short's body, so they wouldn't leave blood evidence behind. And just a large bloody drop of water that contained blood in it, was found in the cement bags, so it's entirely possible, though, that that's what was used. And then he also talked about a common myth of the case that Chayna Roth even addresses in her book, Cold Case. I mean, you might even find this on the Wikipedia or something, that when Elizabeth Short's body was found, her intestines were neatly placed and packed in the lower portion of her body that had been cut off. Once again, her body was cut in half, the upper half with the torso and the arms and her head, and then the lower half of her body, which had the legs, and everything from the belly button and down, which would include the small intestine. And her intestines were neatly packed into the lower portion of her body, and he said that that was mostly untrue. And Chayna Roth said the exact same thing in her book, that the intestines were actually hanging out. And what Larry Harnish was proposing was, it's most likely that her intestines just weren't scattered when the perpetrator, or whoever brought her to the dump site, put her down. That's just how she landed. And it definitely seems like she was placed in a specific position, and that's how she was placed there, as opposed to someone who is being extremely neat and extremely careful. Now, I told you guys that one of the videos from Larry Harnish I was watching was a Steve Hodel react video, and he was talking about how Steve Hodel gave an interview, and he's just responding to it. And he gave a warning at the beginning, saying that Steve Hodel does not like to talk about the Black Dahlia. He likes to talk about his father and his books and himself, but he doesn't really talk too much about Elizabeth Short. And I was watching this video. I watched part 1 and I discussed it last week. This is part 2. Both of them are about 1 hour long. I made it through 15 minutes, and I had to give up. 15 minutes of listening to Steve Hodel, I couldn't deal with it anymore, because of everything that I was warned about. He was not talking about the Black Dahlia. He was not talking about Elizabeth Short. He was not talking about the forensics. He was not talking about the crime scene. He wasn't even talking about the popular misconceptions that people have about the case, like Chaina Roth, or about how people perceive Elizabeth Short in the 21st century, like in the book Cold Cases. He's just talking about his father, his books, and himself, and that is everything. And I'm like, I mean, Steve Hodel, I've never met you. I don't really know what you're like. I mean, we have corresponded a couple times, but I really wanted, the hard substance material coming from a researcher who claims that he has solved the Black Dahlia case, amongst others, but definitely and most notably the Black Dahlia case, Black Dahlia Avenger coming out in 2003, and just going very public stating that he has identified the murderer of Elizabeth Short, and it was his father, George Hodel. And I'm not hearing anything other than just stories about himself, and that really did not do very well for me. But again, Larry Harnish is a researcher who has been following the Black Dahlia case since '96, and he was talking about how to get the good information on the Black Dahlia murder. And this is one that started out as, I have to listen to him. I have to learn from him because I'm a newcomer. This is episode 4. He's done it for 30 years. I've done it for 4 weeks. And one thing that he said was, a lot of the books out there contain misinformation. Even the book that I was citing in this episode, The Black Dahlia in Hollywood, is one that he condemned. But he said that one of the best ways to examine this story is by looking at the original news coverage from 1947, the original newspaper articles that came out shortly after the murder of Elizabeth Short, specifically before early February with the murder of Jean French, because then the newspapers were really, really paying close attention to this particular story. And I'm all for that. I'm all for reading the early news articles, and I don't doubt him. I mean, Larry Harnish is a journalist. He does know what he's talking about, but it's not as easy as that. I'm going to share something with you guys, and this is going to be very unpopular, but absolutely every person listening to this agrees with me. Where do you get the correct information about a true crime case? Like where? The old newspaper articles? The case file? Eyewitness testimonies? No. Where do you get the true information about a true crime case? Nowhere. There is no perfect way to obtain the true crime information. Just hard work, connecting the dots, evaluating thousands of pieces of information, and trying to figure it out on your own. But there is no perfect place to look. Sometimes you will encounter early news articles that are filled with errors and mistakes and fantasy-filled journalism. Other times they will have really, really good information. Well, how do you know which one to read? I have dealt with this a lot in the Zodiac Killer mystery. Every Monday I talk about the Zodiac Killer here on Black Box Online Radio, and specifically with the unconfirmed crimes. And the one that comes to mind is the disappearance and murder of Donna Lass from 1970. In 2021, I did a multi-part series on the disappearance of Donna Lass, and she was still a missing person at the time. Her remains were found in 1986, but not identified until 2023. And when I was reading the early news coverage, just as Larry Harnish was saying, and, I'm not knocking him. He's right. That is a method you can use. I'm just sharing my own experience. When I was reading the early news coverage, you're going to see crazy differences, like very, very important differences. Oh, well, the last time she was seen was on September 6th at 1:40 a.m. at her place of employment. Oh, no, a completely different story is shared by a newspaper that puts out an article the same day saying she was last seen on September 7th in the early evening walking with a blonde-haired man. Well, I'm like, as a newcomer to that story at the time, I was just, well, which one do I agree with? Was she last seen by a witness named Joan Bentley at 1:40 a.m. in the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino? Or was she last seen with some mysterious blonde-haired man on the side of the road? Which one do I accept? And ultimately, I think the blonde-haired man story is fabricated, and it's just a mistake, or it's just some type of incorrect information. I don't believe there was any witness sighting on September 7th of Donna Lass, but I'm going to come down from that cloud now, and I invite you to check out some of my episodes on Donna Lass, most notably the Zodiac Killer at Lake Tahoe, and perhaps I'll do a big follow-up on her case in the future. And ultimately, newspaper articles are not always reliable, and sometimes the information in the case file is not reliable. Sometimes they have transcripts of interviews, and it turns out it's not exactly what somebody said or intended. They're just intended to be paraphrased. I mean, like, someone paraphrased what someone intended to say, and this can be very, very tricky. So, how do you investigate a true crime case? Look at everything, absolutely everything, and try to connect the dots and try to figure it out. I always remember a quotation from Cloyd Steiger, the homicide detective who wrote the book Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, and he said that he read a newspaper article once, just to start the day, about a case that he was working on, and almost every single detail in the article was false. It was just, they were just mistakes. I've read those when I've been looking at things compared to the the stronger understanding of the narrative, and you find a newspaper article that's just filled with misinformation. Sure. So then the next point is that at a certain level, we can achieve an understanding of the facts, and certain facts can be widely distributed. And in terms of how people respond to these facts, commentary can be valuable. Because, say for example, with the Zodiac Killer mystery, when was the first Zodiac crime? December 20th of 1968. When was the second Zodiac Killer crime? July 4th of 1969. Well, when was it? 11:55 p.m. to midnight. Well, and when did they find the bodies? Well, they called them in at 12:10 a.m. That's the time that has been marked, and then the Zodiac called it in at 12:40. But at that point, they were already in the hospital. Darlene Ferrin, the victim, was pronounced dead at 12:38. Those things are not really open for discussion or dispute. Maybe the 11:55 thing, but at a certain level, we can have certain facts that almost everybody accepts. This is when commentary can be very valuable. For example, one thing that Larry Harnish said that is, some good food for thought. I'm going to give two sides of the issue, but he said, anytime you find a book that is just a true crime anthology, you can just throw it away, skip it, walk away. When you see someone selling a true crime anthology book, it's just all based on secondary sources, and it's never going to get to the heart of the issue. I just told you guys I was reading the book Cold Cases by Chayna Roth. I think she got a little bit heavy on the pro-female, pro-feminine belief system, and I think that really ruined her presentation on the Black Dahlia. I would so much rather just hear what she genuinely thought about how you would solve the mystery. Yes, of course, remember the victims and be respectful to them, but at the same time, a lot of her perceptions of how people respond to the story are only about 10 to 20% in line with what I think is actually happening, so I gave my response. I don't dismiss anthologies, though, because they have ideas in them. I don't dismiss anthologies because they have opinions, commentary, insights, and always remember that anybody can have an idea. Anybody can figure something out. Maybe some person is going to look at the facts that we have established, and they're just going to connect the dots in the absolute right way. Okay, that's one thing. Now, to give credit to Larry Harnish, most of the time, maybe you can find a better source than a true crime anthology. Maybe there are going to be stronger sources out there. And if you want to concentrate on that, and you're not someone who is a fan of opinions, then if it's not for you, it's not for you. And you have every right to just look for your information somewhere else. But also, here's another point about books. Larry Harnish was talking about how there's a book out there called Severed by John Gilmore. It might be one of the most famous books about the Black Dahlia case, and I give total credit to him because when you look at the cover of the book Severed, I don't know about you, but I just think, wow, I want to read that book. You have my undivided attention. And of course, that's what it's done for. That's what a book cover is for. And this is one of the first books that I learned about, and even before Dahlia Thursday. And I've shared the image on Black Box Online Radio many times. But Severed became a foundational book for John Douglas, who wrote the book The Cases That Haunt Us, and his analyses and insights into the Black Dahlia case. And somebody was saying this in the comments section about how John Douglas got a lot of his understanding of the Black Dahlia case from the book Severed. Well, John Douglas doesn't try to hide that. In The Cases That Haunt Us, he cites the book by name multiple times, and Larry Harnish just absolutely trashed it and said that it's 50% fiction and 25% mistakes and only 25% fact. So that's going to happen. And that's terrible. It's terrible that people are just going to intentionally distort their narratives to try and sell books. If you're sharing an honest, heartfelt opinion about what you really think, that's good. When someone is lying, that's bad. Or also, when someone gets fluffy on the details to intentionally misrepresent a case, to make it seem like it's more extreme than it actually is, that's also bad. So, in terms of like true crime books, we can be very wary of them. But at the same time, I'm not opposed to reading them because it's up to us, as the enthusiasts, as the citizen sleuths, to try and sort through the information and actually figure out what's going on. Back to the Donna Lass case, what I ultimately ended up doing was looking as much of the news coverage as possible and trying to find the real things that seemed to be very consistent, other things that seemed to be substantiated, and then I was able to get somewhat of an understanding. It might not be perfect, and there's a lot of contradictory information out there, but that really requires a lot of time and effort. So, yes, of course, I'm really trying to show you that I agree with a lot of what Larry Harnish is saying. It's just I'm providing a little bit of counterbalance. Look at the news coverage, look at the FBI files, look at the case files, but always remember that humans make mistakes. And then when you find a piece of contradictory information, hey, how can both of these stories be true? That is when you really just need to save that, on your desktop, on your mental desktop homepage, and keep all of that info in line. Maybe it will be valuable, and maybe it's a piece of info that you can eliminate. So, that's just kind of my rant on looking at true crime cases. I really just listen to everything, explore everything, find the commonalities, find the consistencies, and exclude all of the things that are unsubstantiated. And if somebody that seems like a grifter, you can just toss them in the trash and try and look for a different source. If somebody seems like a grifter and they're selling opinions, especially then, because an opinion should come from the heart and from the mind, not from the wallet. End of rant. Okay, so let me know what you think about the Black Dahlia case. Let me know what you think about anything associated with this series here. What do you think about Red Manley as a suspect? I think he's one of the weakest true crime suspects that I've ever encountered. And often when somebody has been mostly eliminated, I use the story of, instead of suspect, I would say Black Dahlia, the story of Red Manley. Maybe I should have done that for this episode instead. But anyway, I would love to know your feedback, and also, I'm going to keep going through Larry Harnish's videos, because I can see that he is the real deal, and that he has evaluated this information. But, of course, I might not agree with everything, but I can tell that he has actually evaluated not only the news coverage, but the FBI files. And when he calls out people, he often provides a reference to what he is saying, and he is citing sources all the time, and it's great stuff. So I thank Lehman again for sharing his channel with me, and it really does seem like it's going to be very beneficial for these Dahlia Thursdays. And if you have anything at all, please put your ideas in the comments section down below. Remember, anyone can have an idea. Anyone can have an insightful statement, and I would love to read your messages. blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and blackboxned88 on Instagram. This show comes to you Monday through Friday here on YouTube. Monday is about the Zodiac Killer. Tuesdays about JonBenet Ramsey. Wednesdays about Jack the Ripper, Thursdays about the Black Dahlia, and Fridays about D.B. Cooper. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. And that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. That's all for me now. Until next time.